Every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, July 12th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. It's Casual Friday, ladies and gentlemen. But nothing casual at all about today. We are jam-packed at Netroots Nation 2019. We will have a series of interviews that today emanating from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I will be talking to an array of, I'm sorry, that's not going to work, of folks on various issues and going on here. So bear with me, a little bit hectic, but we've got it going. Adele Stan? Oh, let me turn on your mic. It's one of those days, folks, and I got to be honest with you. It's not like I just went home and took a nap last night. No, oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. Try that one more time. Adele Stan.
Hi, Sam. Great to be with you.
From the Right Wing Watch?
Yes, indeed.
You're our second guest from the Right Wing Watch on the program.
Oh, my goodness.
Right wing, lot to watch.
There's a lot to watch. Well, you know, I just did a panel today at Netroots about the rise of right-wing authoritarianism, and basically my mantra is this, Sam. It's the right wing, the far right is a global movement, number one. Number two, the far right is not fringe. It's at the heart of power, and we see this every day, of course, with this administration.
Now, I mean, let's talk about right-wing authoritarianism, because I'm trying to think of the author. He was a Canadian professor.
Yeah.
And John Dean based a lot of what he wrote in his book about conservatives about maybe 10 years ago, based on the work of this author from Canada, who suggested there at any given point in North America, there's about 25% of the population are right-wing authoritarians. And there is a left-wing authoritarianism, but it's just not as prevalent because of the nature of the left.
Right.
What do you think it is about this era that has brought it? I mean, is it just a function of Trump? Because you're talking about it being international. So what is that?
Well, it's, you know, this is, I would say that author is correct. I mean, I haven't read his particular work, but I mean, we see that about 24% of the U.S. electorate, and that's, you know, the electorate, not the general population. Unfortunately, a lot of our people don't vote, but 24% of the U.S. electorate is right-wing evangelicals. So that sounds like a credible figure to me. I think this is a strain of Americanism that has existed for a very long time, you know, in terms of the American form, the U.S. form of right-wing authoritarianism. And the right wing has been building this apparatus for 40 years, while, you know, the left has been less involved in building infrastructure in the way that the right has. So if you look at the ideology of, say, what we call white nationalists now, and the ideology of, say, the Family Research Council, you're not going to find a whole lot of daylight between, you know, the viewpoints.
It's Bob Altemeyer was the author, and he.
Oh, thank you.
Worth tracking down. I tried to talk to him about a year or two ago to see if he would come on. He had issued actually a warning in the run-up to the election about Donald Trump. He had some belief that Donald Trump was going to win.
I did
because
too.
These authoritarians were going to be activated. He was very nervous, and I spoke to him a couple of times to try and get him on the show. And frankly, he was a little bit nervous. Just not sure that he had much to say at that point. You know, it's tough to sort of warn people about hitting the the lamppost after you've run it over.
And I think, because the U.S. is, got oceans on either side of it, and we have a propensity for narcissism, being the biggest, baddest nation on the face of the earth, as we like to think of ourselves, that we really haven't been paying attention to this thing as a global project, and it truly is. The religious right has been making inroads with far-right parties and actors in Europe for a very long time, and other parts of the world too. And as we see with Bolsonaro in Brazil, Michelle Bachmann was working with him.
Is that right?
Steve Bannon was working with him.
We should say Bolsonaro just appointed his son to be ambassador to Washington.
Well, Trump loves Bolsonaro.
Right. I mean, and so let me just see if I get the sort of the broader scenario. These things have been building for some time. The networks have been created, and essentially, it feels like that the idea of the groundwork has been laid, and then we have something like the financial crisis, and we have waves of austerity, and so the context becomes ripe. Mm-hmm. Essentially, and that's when this kicks in, right? I mean, so it's like it's in the background, it's ongoing, and it's just sort of waiting for the right opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Steve Bannon's career, and I think it's really instructive. I mean, now, Bannon is not the great man that he would like us to believe he is, but he's very consequential and important. I first came across Steve Bannon in 2010 when he was really kind of the chief propagandist for the Tea Party movement, and he was not he was not a frontline face of the movement, but he'd been working behind the scenes making propaganda for that movement for a very, very long time. And this project just continues, and now we see him running around Europe, organizing the far-right parties of Europe, consulting for them. We don't know who's paying him.
I mean, is he doing okay? The last interview I saw with him, he was cornered, I guess, by, I can't remember exactly who it was, but they questioned, he was claiming he was talking to, I think, like the Italian fascists or something.
Yes.
And the host said, well, I think it was Axios. It was on that Axios thing where they asked him, well, we spoke to that guy, and he said, you've barely been around. I mean, they said, we've spoken to that guy, and he says that he hasn't seen much of you. But it's hard to know, isn't it?
Well, here's something that I came across, right? I was in Brussels during the run-up to the campaign for the European Union parliamentary elections. Bannon set up shop in Paris, customarily in a 5-star hotel. He only stays in 5-star hotels. He only travels by private plane, where he caused some consternation to Marine Le Pen, who heads the far-right party in France, because what he wanted to do, he was sort of advancing himself as the Svengali of these far-right parties that were all vying for spots in the European Union Parliament. And so at the same time, she needed to distance herself from him, just as Salvini would need to distance himself from Bannon, because these are nationalists, right? Their whole shtick is that, they are Italy for Italians, France for the French. To have some American gurus appear to be bigfooting and guiding their campaigns would not reflect well on them. So it is difficult to know exactly where Bannon sits with them. However, I will say this, and that is, while Bannon was in Paris, several deputies of Marine Le Pen's party paid, social calls on him. He's he understands the data analytics. He understands messaging. So is he just having friendly, how's your wife, how's your kids kind of convos? Or
right.
I kind of doubt it.
Me too. He doesn't seem like that type of guy who cares.
And he seems to have just his unlimited cash flow. And we know he's, a wealthy-ish guy, right? He's but that wealthy, I don't know.
Well, so you're tracking this stuff,
right?
And to a large extent, people have not been paying enough attention. But in the parallel universe where people were paying more attention, like what do you do?
This is always the question, right? And I think we can loop this around domestically too. How I'm sensing a sort of. It's great to be at Netroots where it's positive and we've got energy growing. However, it's difficult to.
Here you go. Oh, excuse me one second, please. Can you just leave the chair and not sit there? I'm sorry. Some folks don't realize you're in the middle. It's a little bit distracting.
It's live radio,
yeah,
Sam.
I understand.
Okay. But it's truly difficult to.
I'm sorry. Were you pulling that chair? Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can you repeat?
Okay.
Can you repeat?
Yeah. No. So the question is like, what do we do about it?
What can we do? Right. And so we're here at Netroots where the energy is very positive, but out there in the country, you can feel kind of a sense of paralysis in general, given our domestic politics, and I think also in terms of the global situation to those who are in the know, right? Because we kind of don't know what to do right now. We're not in the streets, all of that. But what I would say is we need to really start thinking about what we want to say. What do we have to say to people who feel powerless? What do we have to say to them? Can we gather people together through the use of great memes? I mean, the right is running circles around us in the digital space. Can we create platforms of our own? We need to be super creative, and I know people want an answer now, but if we don't build infrastructure, if we keep moving from election to election without building infrastructure of these types of real organically grown creative shops, that's really what we need to do. We need to be gathering people to educate them about the threat. And we need to scare people because fear is what works.
Well, who's the we in this scenario? Like, I mean, is this an institutional project? Is this, do we need more people to be joining the DSA? Where does this, when we say we, like,
right.
Who are we talking about?
Okay, so I would say all of it, right? And I know that's kind of too easy an answer. Yes, we do need institutional players. We really do. And if you're a Democratic, if you're a social democrat, join the DSA, sure. And they're a good activist organization. However, I also think that people can use their own individual agency to create things because of the social media platforms available to us to distribute it. In other words, so I keep talking about the word propaganda. One of the reasons I know as much as I do about Bannon, and I hardly know the whole story, is that I've always been fascinated by him as a propagandist. And when I discuss him, I often talk about his work as a propagandist because he was very talented as a propagandist. We have a lot of creative people on our side. We need to, sometimes individual agency is what we need. It would be great if some of the institutional players would help that along.
Right.
Help that along, grant some money to some artists, grant some money to other creative people, that kind of thing, and get some stuff going. But it has to come from both places. And if it doesn't come up from the grassroots, it always feels canned.
Someone was just telling me that at that authoritarian panel, I think that the idea that propaganda is a value-neutral term came up.
I advanced that idea, and I believe that.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I have, since the beginning that I was on Air America, I would say, when people ask me, what's your job? And I was like, I'm an aspiring propagandist.
Yes.
And people were aghast at that. And I said, look, will you please just explain that concept? Because, I've been told that the left can't do propaganda, literally can't do it. It's not possible.
That's ridiculous.
For the left to do it because propaganda is necessarily deceitful information.
You don't have a movement without propaganda.
Right. Well, just explain to people what propaganda is.
So propaganda is nothing more than having a point of view encapsulated in a message. Now, it doesn't mean you lie. A lot of propaganda is lies. But it doesn't have to be. Right. You can tell the truth through the lens of your experience and do it creatively. Do it on a radio program. Do it in a podcast. Do it in a sign that you imagine being. You can create a protest if you create the propaganda for it. We always think that's putting the cart before the horse. Create the art, then make the movement around the art.
Right. Well, Adele Stan, if people want to read more of your work, where would they go? rightwingwatch.org. We're a project of People for the American Way. And I also have a column at the American Prospect, prospect.org, where I write a lot about these issues as well. Great. Adele Stan, always a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam.
All right, folks, we are going to now cut to a pre-taped interview. Right, Matt? You look like... Okay. You have a look on your face of like, I don't know, maybe it's when you look into the Skype, you look terrified. But we're going to play an interview I did just about an hour ago with Winnie Wong and Brianna Joy Gray. She nailed me. I called her Greyjoy.
Yeah, but she called it the Minority Report in the other interview.
We ended up both copping to that in the interview. So we dispensed with that. It was a little tit for tat. It was like a brushback pitch.
It was the.
You're gonna hit my batter who hit the home run. I'm gonna throw at somebody's head. That's how it basically happens.
Push him off the plate a little bit.
Exactly.
Who was taking the chair, Sam? That's what everybody wants to know.
Well, no, it was a guy, and he's a nice guy, and he was here before.
Don't take that chair.
Well,
I'm broadcasting.
It's not that he was taking the chair.
He was sitting on the chair.
We couldn't hear each other because I don't have headphones for the guests. And he was talking to Brendan.
I see.
Right in front of the camera. And sometimes it's like this sort of... There are people at conferences where I get it. Like, you just see a dude sitting at a booth, and you're like, okay, I can walk up to that guy, and what's the big deal? He's talking into a microphone, but it can't be anything that's that relevant. And they just start talking to you. And it's, they do it with the nicest of intentions, but it's like, this is not a natural state for me. I don't walk around with a microphone.
I could actually see you addressing your kids through
It's not inconceivable that I would do something like that.
Good morning.
Right, exactly.
We have, here's what's for breakfast, and here's what we're doing later. And I just love that, though.
Has anyone seen my socks?
Right, exactly, right.
Okay, all right. Well,
the agita was real. It was good.
No, yes. Listen, I'm gonna cop to the audience.
Okay, thank you.
4 or 5 hours of sleep last night.
Indeed.
Brendan, was literally following me around, going chug, 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 chug all last night. Yeah.
Wow.
And so
but does New Jersey?
That's what you're paying for.
Does New Jersey Jeeves realize that when he does that, he's causing himself problems the next day?
He called you New Jersey Jeeves. So I drank a little bit, and of course, what Netroots is, and I think it's like this for a lot of people, but it's just like you go around and you meet other people who have just as passionate opinions about politics as you do, and you're in a bar, and you just keep drinking and yelling at each other about politics.
Oh, wow.
And but I met a great candidate who's going to be taking on Lowy in the New York 17.
Oh, Lowy, that's a big one.
Yes, and this guy...
That's great.
Very, very impressive guy.
So we've got a whole set of candidates now.
Oh, sorry, I just lost that.
Because we have a really impressive guy taking on Elliott as well.
Yep, and his name is Mondaire Jones. And we're in the bar. He's coming around because he wants to meet these activists. And his policies are all aligned, and he's just. It's interesting to hear the dynamics of this. I met a couple of members. Apparently, the Philadelphia City Council only allows for 5 members of any given party to sit on the council. And in the past, it's been Democrats 5, Republicans 2. And the Working Families Party is saying, like, well, guess what? The Republicans don't have to have those 2 other seats. And so they're going to try and make it 5 Democrats, 2 Working Families Party members on the City Council of Philadelphia.
I like it.
Meet people who are working with Krasner, the DA here. We're trying to get him on the show.
Yeah, that would be really good to get
Krasner
it's just
it really
I actually
is.
thought the first guest I liked Adele. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, no,
I'd like
she's
to hear from her more.
Yes, she's been around for a long time coming to this conference, and I've caught up with her, but we should have her on more. But
where is Eskow? You're right next to Eskow. Where is he?
Yeah, no, he's coming around. Like, I'm going to do some pre-tapes with some people, and that's what I'm going to do this afternoon. This afternoon, we're also going to be doing Adam Green from PCCC and I last night at the bar came up with an idea of, like, we should have a panel, an impromptu panel at Netroots that we're going to do right here at this table. And I'm going to record. We're trying to figure out how to make it hearable for all the reporters that Adam Green is going to get here. But we're going to be doing a panel with a couple other folks. I'm not exactly sure who he's gotten. I think right now, tentatively, it is Amy Allison and Alexander Rojas. And we're going to run an interview I did with Alexander Rojas in a bit on this program. She's the executive director of Justice Democrats. Amy Allison, I think, is head of She the People. And the panel is going to be a conversation on really the question, is Joe Biden the riskiest candidate in the Democratic field?
So all of a sudden we can talk about electability, you little prick.
Well, I'm just moderating.
I see.
I'm moderating. So.
Nice.
But all right, let's run this interview with Bree Joy Gray and Winnie Wong. They are both members of the Bernie Sanders campaign. Let's run that now. We are back. Sam Seder, our continuing coverage of Netroots Nation 2019. With me now, 2 top officials in the Bernie Sanders campaign. Brianna Greyjoy, she's the National Press Secretary. Winnie Wong, the senior political advisor. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So, Winnie, let's start with you. What is at this point in the campaign, what do you perceive as the single greatest challenge that Bernie Sanders has?
I don't think we really have very many challenges at all, to be honest. I think we're we are building out a very strong organization, and we are focused on the issues, and we know that Donald Trump must be defeated. And I think that is what the senator and the team is singularly focused on. With just sort of advancing every day with that knowledge that we have to defeat Donald Trump. That this isn't really up for debate. And so all of our energy and all of our resources are devoted to that end goal.
I think when you have a movement-building project like the one we are aiming to create, the enemy is often less often other candidates. The challenges aren't defeating other candidates or any other individuals, insofar as they are defeating the structural impediments that have always kept people from forming the broad-based coalition that is required to actually wrest power away from the powers that be, the 1%, the oligarchy. You see Bernie Sanders recently launched on his website a list of people who have called him out as the only political candidate that they are against. Any of the Democrats could win, but not Bernie Sanders. And I don't know if you remember in his Democratic Socialism speech about a month ago, he did that FDR quote where he says, "I welcome their hatred." And he genuinely welcomes the hatred of people who have been thwarting the the needs and the ability for the American people to live their lives with dignity and equality. And I think that those people, those powers that be, who have invested millions and millions of dollars in spreading misinformation about Medicare for all and a lot of these other programs that stand to benefit the American people so extraordinarily, that's the challenge. That's the ongoing challenge. And that's the challenge for everybody who is a part of this movement toward broader equality in this country.
Okay.
She's saying we have to get money out of politics.
Well, yeah, but I mean, okay, but I think the other candidates, folks working for other candidates, would not focus around the building of a movement as a source of their challenge, and I guess because I think it's a different perspective on how you run for president. I mean, I don't have a huge a breadth of political knowledge, but a decent amount, and the articulation of trying to build a movement as the primary sort of focus of a presidential campaign is fairly unique, I think, at least as a conscious effort. I mean, can you look back in history and sort of track? I mean, if you guys, because Sanders going and using his email list for on immigration, completely distinct from what you would necessarily do as a campaign, if that was your singular focus. So I guess what I'm asking is, when you look back as a senior political advisor, are there models for this, for building a movement for running a campaign and building a movement simultaneously in such a conscious way?
I mean, I think when we look back in history, and we look back at two different periods in history, we'll say the 60s civil rights movement and then the movement in the 30s to defeat fascism, and we look back and we see what they did wrong and what they did right, which I think a lot of us inside do look back on those periods of social movement, robust social movements, and it helps inform our work now. We see that both movements were popular movements of people coming together to resist a common enemy. So that's happening now, but they didn't have the internet,
right?
And they didn't have like different forms of different platforms where we could distribute our message. And so I think it's different now. If you think about the 60s and you think about how political revolutionaries or activists like Fred Hampton or other activists were really trying to electoralize their work on the streets, and how quickly the state tamped that down, and we try to move that into today's context, we see that like it's impossible to do that now because there's so many political revolutionaries, and our principle is a political revolutionary. So it's important to actually take this moment to build power politically.
Yeah, I do think, to your point, that is there an example of the movement coming from inside the House in the
Right.
way that this campaign is aspiring to do? I can't think of an example of that. But what is true is that every time we've seen a significant social advancement in this country, a revolutionary moment, it has come not willingly at the behest of individual political leaders, but because of the pressure of an outside movement. So a movement has always been essential to actual change being affected. And there's this story, I believe it was LBJ, who had a meeting with civil rights leaders and said, okay, I agree with you, but now go out there and make me do it. Because without the political pressure, has historically provided some cover for politicians who might otherwise take political heat for doing what even they believed was right. And politicians who did not necessarily agree with the movement would go ahead and advance goals,
right,
if they were pressured to do so. I mean, at the end of the day, it was Nixon who signed the EPA, right? So I think that this campaign, because it is internalizing the movement structure, stands to perhaps do even more than any of these other politicians and any of these other crucial political moments have been able to do, because they're not relying solely. They don't need to be convinced, and we are willing to do the right thing, even when it's not politically expedient. The reason I wasn't even planning to come to Netroots, the reason that I'm here today is because I came yesterday to help protest the closure of Hahnemann University Hospital, right? And this is part and parcel what the campaign wants to do. Like, regardless of whether or not Bernie Sanders gets in office, and we believe he will be, the movement making doesn't start or stop when he enters the White House. He doesn't decide to go and stand with Walmart workers or Amazon workers or Disney workers based on a political cycle. He's been doing that since before. He's been doing that his entire life, to be honest.
Right. And I mean, there's an argument that I think some political watchers would say, like, well, it's a diversion of resources. Like, I mean, it seems that it's not an irrational argument to say, most campaigns would say, we're going to put all our resources into getting elected, and then we'll worry about that other stuff.
But we think people are one of our biggest resources. It's I think it was an AOC quote, now appropriate by Ryan Grant for his book. They got money, we got people.
Right.
And all of those people who see us standing in solidarity understand that the mission isn't, I need to get in office because I think I'm the special snowflake that needs to run the country. It's, these are my goals, and my interest in being in office is only to advance these goals, which I shared with you and have shown solidarity for decades, frankly, in the case of Bernie Sanders.
When I think about the Hahnemann protest yesterday that we showed up for, I think about how this particular conference could have actually given more support to the protest. It could have been, hundreds of people showed up, mostly because labor unions and Senator Sanders turned out bodies from his email list. And if the conference had actually said, you know what, we're going to actually send folks over, it could have been 3,000 people. I mean, it's a fight that we have to show up to, and it's a fight that people need to know about, because if this is allowed to happen in Philadelphia, it will happen in every major city.
Right.
We cannot let a hospital that serves underserved people close. There are maternity wards. The maternity ward is closing. There are 48 women who are pregnant and who are ready to give birth in that hospital right now. There are patients with terminal cancer who are receiving treatment right now. There are elderly people with diabetes who are receiving treatment right now. They cannot go anywhere. They would have to take 3 buses in their infirm condition to even receive treatment.
Right.
So what this is actually a death sentence. And so when the senator sees that this is a fight of humanity, of basic humanity, he's going to show up, and he's going to move his staff and the resources at his disposal, i.e. his email list, to turn people out to show up for the fight. And I think he'll continue to do that. And that's a defining characteristic, or a defining it's the defining feature of
It's
our
why
Right.
I'm here. It makes me proud.
Yeah.
It makes me genuinely proud to be a member of this campaign.
And I should just say, for folks who didn't hear my interview yesterday with David Dayen about this, Hahnemann is sort of a proof of concept for a private equity to come in, buy the hospital, separate the hospital from the land, bankrupt the hospital, keep the land, sell the land, develop it for condos. This can happen, like you say, urban centers around the country. This particular private equity outfit owns half a dozen other hospitals in
Howard University Hospital in D.C.
In D.C., L.A., a couple other cities. And then, of course, it doesn't have to end with hospitals. You can go to any sort of massive institutions that are, serving folks in the urban cities. All right, well, so with that said, this notion of building the movement, simultaneously running for a campaign, how does it affect your strategy when there are other candidates who, because they rely on big donors, they've got to prove certain things early on in the campaign to maintain that support, where Bernie Sanders relies primarily on small donors who have not maxed out in this month, a year and a half out from the thing. presumably you know how many of those people have already signed up to give on a monthly basis. So the campaign, in some respects, doesn't have the same pressure. How does that change the strategy, as opposed to, say, someone like who's gone all in on Iowa? If we don't win in Iowa, we're done. There's multiple candidates, I think, who probably are, that's their calculation. I don't think that's Bernie Sanders' calculation, because he has the resources to go, and much of the movement building, theoretically, right, will pay off later. These are not a short-term investment. So how does that affect the strategy in terms of like what Sanders feels he needs to do, or what the campaign feels it needs to be now, 6 months from now, et cetera?
I mean, I think we have to reach voters. Like this is the strategy. You win when you speak to people at the doors. You win when you communicate a message that is authentic and speaks to the values of working families across the country. I mean, that it's very basic.
What
we
has
have
been
to
that,
reach
that
the maximum.
How many voters do you think you've touched at this point? I mean, how many?
I don't actually know. I know that we've certainly sent a lot of text messages, multiple millions of text messages. We know that 99% of our small dollar donors are eligible to donate again, and they will likely be able to continue to donate. So if you look at like the average donation and you repeat that average donation for the next 2 quarters, you can see that we're probably on track to match what we've made in Q2, and so that's great. And we are. Look, we have a great campaign manager. We have a great team. We have a very hardworking principal. He's very hardworking. He campaigns tirelessly across the country. He also is a senator who shows up for votes and organizes inside his office and writes endless op-eds. So he's a busy guy, and we are building a team culture. And I think that's all I can say. We're going to reach as many voters as we possibly can, and we're going to stay focused on running a positive campaign where we contrast our position to the positions of our competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that any other campaign can say they have a 1 million person strong volunteer army, especially at this point in the process, or who can say that in Q2 they got nearly 1 million individual donations, right?
Right.
Like that's extraordinary. That's a
and that's not
genuine
something
reflection.
that you necessarily see the
I
benefits
donated
of until
$3.
people actually go to the polls.
Right. Well, those that's much more reflective of actual voters who have a true investment in the campaign so early, mind you, than if another candidate might be the highest earning candidate this quarter, but if you're earning $24 million, raising $24 million, and you have a 4% approval rating, it really begs the question: who is funding this campaign?
Right.
Who is actually asking for this campaign? And is this campaign going to ultimately be responsible to the will of the people? If Bernie Sanders no longer is compelling to the millions of small donors that are giving to him, well, they'll stop donating.
Right.
He has to be beholden to the masses in a way that other people aren't. And that's why you see using his organizing list to rally people to various causes as not a waste of time. But of course, ethically, intrinsically, it's valuable, but also it's very much a core to continuing to keep people inspired that this is the mission, and that the mission isn't going to change regardless of whether or not he is in the White House or not.
Well, Brianna Gray-Joy, National Press Secretary.
It's actually Brianna Joy Gray. A lot of people do the Westeros thing with me. They Game of Thrones it. No worries, you're not the
Grey
first.
Joy.
Yeah.
Oh, the people from the Iron
Leon,
Islands.
exactly. I mean, Yara's
I'm Sam
pretty
Seder,
great.
and this is the Minority Report. Those are the things I get. Seder and Minority Report. I'm sorry.
I did it to you on our podcast the other day. So.
That's back at you.
Even
Got you
Stevens.
back. Got you back.
What's for lunch?
Brianna Joy Gray, National Press Secretary. Winnie Wong, Senior Political Advisor for Bernie Sanders. Thank you both for talking to us today.
It's my pleasure.
I don't. There you go. What's that, Glenn Beck? Why am I hearing Glenn Beck? Sending Glenn Beck back to me.
It's just the rest of my library.
Oh, I heard. Why do you have a library of Glenn Beck?
I don't know. We can't get into it right now.
Okay, it's probably best that we don't. Continuing our coverage here at the Netroots Nation 2019. Jeff Hauser from the Revolving Door Project. Is that right? Is that what it's called?
That is exactly what it's called.
Okay, and this is bear with me here. I think will you say something?
Sure. This is Jeff Hauser, Revolving Door Project at his 5th Netroots Nation.
Gosh, I don't know what's going on here. I'm trying to try it one more time.
This is Jeff Hauser here at his 5th Netroots Nation.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. So this is your fifth?
Yeah.
But you haven't been here in about 7 years.
Yes, I went to the 2nd, the 4th, and then a couple more early in the decade, and then my son was born.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's really no story as to why you're back.
No, it's not like I've said the Netroots, they're slimy, they're dirty, they're very lefty, I can't hang out with them. That's still my type of people.
Okay. Now, you work on corruption in government. Must be a very slow time for you.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that Donald Trump has brought to government is just we got to be by the books. We can't even push against the limits of the law. We have to respect the truest instincts of the law and the best intentions.
And your pedigree is that you were in the DOJ, is that right?
Yeah, I started out after law school. I accepted a job when I thought that the person who won the election would be inaugurated. I accepted a job in 2000. Unfortunately, that meant I started in 2001 in the antitrust division under John Ashcroft and George W. Bush.
And did you let the mighty eagle soar?
I did not. My karaoke voice is bad for all sorts of songs, but especially John Ashcroft originals.
Okay. So when you see this, I mean, where do you start with something like this? I mean, when you look at what's going on with the Trump administration, is there a hierarchy of? I mean, because I know you have broken stories about the shadow sort of cabinet secretaries and the way that they were staffing places, and that's still ongoing. In fact,
absolutely.
All right, just explain what that project is, and then I just want to ask how you prioritize. Do you prioritize, like, what's the most destructive? What's the most destructive in terms of its durability? I mean, how do you manage all that stuff? And then I guess we'll talk about the shadow.
Sure. Well, they're connected in that I got a tip in January of 2017 that Trump was preparing a launching pad of his beachhead who were going to go into the government, not as Senate-confirmed officials and not as well-meaning members of civil society, but rather basically former lobbyists. We're going to go spend a few months setting up the Trump administration on behalf of their both past and future clients. And they were going to do so at a scale that had never before been seen, and they were bringing in literally the worst people. And why that was so important is not just that it kind of undermines the Constitution's appointments clause and our general sense that the executive branch should be run by Senate-confirmed officials, but also because they were doing so on behalf of America's worst corporate interests. And to me, the Trump scandals that matter the most are where you can connect Trump's criminality or scandalous behavior to issues where rich jerks are making money and the rest of us are getting hurt. So when the intersection of kitchen table issues and of Trump scandals. Now, all of the Trump scandals matter. All of them are worth attention. I don't disparage any of them. But to me, the ones that are most glaringly crying out for attention are those where Trump is threatening the well-meaning of American people.
So, in other words, it's got to be both the corruption with policy implications.
Sure. If you look at the Environmental Protection Agency, which is only protecting polluters at this point, there are, statistically speaking, hundreds, if not thousands of people who are going to die on the more traditional types of pollution, dirty water, dirty air, and then obviously we have a climate catastrophe in the making, which is being exacerbated. If you look at the education department, where so many families are burdened by student debt from slimy for-profit colleges, and Betsy DeVos hired past for-profit college lobbyists to run her administration, and then they are beginning to revolve out and go back into that industry, an industry that was almost dead by the end of the Obama administration, but has been revitalized under Betsy DeVos's extremely corrupt reign at the education department. Now, this is going on, obviously, for Wall Street, at Treasury, et cetera, rinse and repeat.
I would just got to say about the for-profit colleges, if you take a look, and I know my audience has said this, and you probably know this as well, but it bears repeating. If you take a look at a graph of a fund of for-profit college stocks, it literally goes like this. It's going down a trajectory like this to November 7th, 2016, and then it shoots up almost directly straight up and just continues to climb. I mean, the day Donald Trump was elected, those stocks went through the roof, and they all knew what was coming.
And Betsy DeVos was a beneficiary, as she owned a lot of those stocks on November 6th, 2016. And her unwinding of those financial ties has been incomplete, to say the least.
Yes. So for you, it's that intersection of policy and corruption, and that has the most durability. What can be done? Well, we're going to end up talking about what's going on with Pelosi, and we're talking about oversight. And I guess to the extent of what is the first thing that could be done, it starts with oversight, right? I mean, it's you can't. Jeff Hauser can write articles about it and can point it out, but that's the end of the story, right? If Congress doesn't do its job.
Nancy Pelosi, in my estimation, has to start looking at the power she has over the House of Representatives, not as a potential liability, but as an asset. That she has the ability to cause fights with Trump on the most advantageous landscape available. The fact that there'd been no effort by Congress to look into Alex Acosta until Trump let him out, pushed him out, whatever happened today, that's ridiculous. Why was Trump quicker to respond to Alex Acosta than the Education and Labor Committee of the House of Representatives? Pelosi needs to start looking at oversight as a set of opportunities to drive a conversation where she can focus on Trump's worst behavior and the behavior that most impacts the American people. And
that's presuming that you don't even stop the corruption, right? It's a benefit. Obviously, stopping the corruption in some way is beneficial, but there's political value in all of this. I mean, even beyond it seems to be exponential.
Yeah, I mean, there's this view you hear from Pelosi defenders that, well, we don't want to do anything like Benghazi. So let's look at Benghazi for a second. A, it's not really a scandal. B, it directly led to the awareness of Hillary Clinton's email server, and then everything that happened with James Comey, which was obviously necessary to Trump's marginal electoral college victory. Jim Comey was necessary for that victory. Jim Comey intervened in the election only because of the Benghazi inquiry. So a non-scandal, if investigated thoroughly, can potentially tip an entire presidential election. What could investigations into actual scandals have as their political outcome? So yes, I, as a good government anti-corruption person, want to see the corruption looked at for substantive reasons. But the political analysis that is a potential liability for Democrats rather than a potentially strong course of action is beyond me.
And it not only has impact on the political fortunes of Donald Trump in 2020, but then you're putting the entire Republican Party in a position where they have to actually actively either ignore an obvious scandal, or they have to do something about it.
I mean, if you are Joni Ernst from Iowa, if you are Martha McSally from Arizona, there are all sorts of behaviors by Trump that you believe that you can distance yourself from because you are not as profane as Donald Trump, you don't violate as many norms as Donald Trump, and you are going to try to use, in both of their cases, they are, serve the country in the military, they have bios that have potential strengths. And so if you're Mitch McConnell and you want to hold on to the Senate, you are trying to protect people like Joni Ernst and Martha McSally from the popular things that a Nancy Pelosi could do. If Nancy Pelosi were to start impeaching not just Trump, but if she were just to start on the cabinet officials who've committed crimes and are very hard to defend, you could start creating pressure on Ernst and McSally and many others to either vote with Trump and risk losing the center, or vote against Trump and risk losing their base. That is a choice they do not want to face, and that is a choice that Nancy Pelosi should be forcing upon Senate Republicans.
This is not sort of, this is not 12-dimensional chess. This is sort of like basic wedge issue politics, right? Like, you need to separate the senators who are vulnerable from Donald Trump. And they don't want to. They just want to sort of like be in this miasma and sort of make it unclear where they are at any given point. And Nancy Pelosi, it seems to me, and Chuck Schumer is, I think is equally, maybe even more so in some respects, responsible for this. I mean, the last week, 2 weeks ago, I had Alex Breen on, and we were talking about this, and he has a theory that Pelosi's not going forward with impeachment because, not unlike we just saw with the funding for the Customs and Border Patrol bill, she's not convinced that, never mind they're going to lose in the Senate, everybody knows that, but she's not convinced that they're not going to lose half of the Democratic caucus in the Senate in an impeachment vote. And of course, that becomes a liability, right, for Democrats in the House.
I mean, I could imagine that being a genuine concern. I'm not, and I'm sure it is. And I guess that is definitely something that Pelosi has to take into account. But honestly, between Pelosi and Schumer, opposition is supposed to be easier in terms of maintaining unity. And the funny thing is, governing is harder. And so Pelosi's great accomplishment in her career is pushing the Affordable Care Act over the finish line when other people lost their nerve. And that was hard because they were trying to officially push a major change in American policy, and that is difficult. And she actually managed to accomplish it then. Now it's actually a lot easier because you have a repugnant president who has not at one time in his presidency been a popular figure. Opposition is supposed to be much easier to maintain unity. Like, we all have disagreements about Medicare buy-in versus single payer and all. Like, those, I understand, those are going to be complicated issues down the line. But you should be able to maintain kids in cages is wrong. Like, that is the type of thing we should be able to stay united. And so, yes, as between Schumer and Pelosi, who's accorded what percentage of the blame, I don't know. But between them, they need to do better.
Right. Between them, it's about 100%.
Yes.
And the idea that you're hesitating to criticize and investigate the guy who gave a sweetheart deal to a child sex trafficker is like, well, I don't understand. Like, do you know anybody who even knows, like, has an idea as to like what's going through their mind? Like, I mean, there are theories that are bound, but I keep like asking people, like hoping to run into the one person who's like, yeah, I know, but this is the theory, and nobody can even give me a theory.
I think that Democrats, and there are pluses and minuses to this, but they rely on seniority to determine who is the committee chair. And you have a lot of people who have spent a long time in the minority who have not been a chair before, and they all dreamed of pushing their legislative agenda as a chair. And they did not dream of doing oversight. And it is unfortunate that they don't consider oversight to be one of their key avenues. But they've essentially begun to outsource all oversight to the House Oversight Committee. There's one specific committee that has oversight over anything it wants, and then 19 committees that have jurisdiction on specific issues and oversight within those issues. And Elijah Cummings is a very busy man. He chairs the House Oversight Committee. He is doing the best he can. He has way too much to look at. But you need the subject matter expertise of House Ways and Means on taxes. You need the House Transportation Committee to look into Boeing and how planes are falling out of the air. You need the House Agriculture Committee to look into how the Secretary of Agriculture is doing all sorts of corrupt business, allowing big agriculture to take advantage of America's farmers, et cetera, et cetera. And they just don't seem to see their job that way. Part of it's cultural, part of it is a failure of individuals, but ultimately Nancy Pelosi sets the agenda for the entire caucus, and she's the easiest person to hold responsible.
Okay, so aside from doing podcasts and getting really mad about it, what could folks at like this conference do?
I think they have to start raising expectations with activists about Congress. They have to start talking about how oversight is really critical to what Congress does and start having higher expectations. I mean, there are potential and current primary challengers to some of the committee chairs. And I don't do electoral work anymore, and I can't recommend anything about that. But it strikes me that if key members of the congressional leadership, actually any member of Congress in the Democratic majority, if they started hearing from their constituents that the constituent wants to see more oversight, that would get heard. It doesn't take that much effort to make Democrats complain to Pelosi, like, look, I'm getting all these phone calls, like they're saying, even if you won't do impeachment, let's do some other oversight. I think that information would be...
it's interesting because I've heard people, like, with Nadler, for instance, he's getting a challenger, and I'm not even convinced, based on a voting record, that the challenger is necessarily even to the left of Nadler. But if it is communicated that, like, look, this challenge is coming because you're not doing proper oversight, that gives him some leverage with Pelosi, doesn't it? I mean, where he's got to go to her and say, like, yeah, okay, you can worry a hypothetical about these, frontline Democrats, but I got something real in my backyard, and I got to deal with it. So I got to move forward with you or without you.
And Nadler has strategically put out through the press the news that, like, he supports impeachment. Like, he is not the primary person responsible. That doesn't mean a primary serves no purpose. In fact, for the exact reason you've identified, it's very important in making this pressure felt by Pelosi. But, Richard Neal may or may not have a primary challenger. Pete DeFazio has a challenger who's at this conference right now. There are other leading members of the Democratic Party who either have challengers or have people contemplating a challenge right now. And I think it's a moment to say that it's not about how you vote only. It's whether or not you're a high energy member of Congress. We want high energy members of Congress who are willing to just do whatever they can, who feel the same urgency that activists do. There are activists here who are doing pro-immigrant activism at this conference. They feel an urgency. They're not paid to do it. It's not their career. They're doing it because they're activists. You'd like to think that elected members of Congress would feel no less urgency than activists feel about all the horrors that are being perpetrated by the Trump administration.
Jeff Hauser, if people want to read your work, support your work, where would they go?
Just Google the Revolving Door Project newsletter. You can sign up, and that's every 2 weeks we put out a compendium of the work that we're working on and the issues we're following.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the time today.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Now we're going to go to a previously recorded interview, another one with Alexandra Rojas. She is the executive director of Justice Democrats. And I spoke to her this morning, this afternoon, yesterday afternoon, sometime in the last 24 hours. And Matt, you ready to run that? Okay, let's run that now. So continuing our coverage at Netroots Nation 2019, I'm here with Alexandra Rojas. She is the executive director of Justice Democrats. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam.
All right, so I think by now my audience has a pretty good sense of what the Justice Democrats are, but give us the sort of the elevator pitch for those who might not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're trying to transform the Democratic Party to actually fight for its voters and not just corporate donors. For us, that means engaging in competitive primary elections to recruit a new generation of leadership and build a mission-driven team of Justice Democrats in the House that are actually going to present solutions as big as the problems that we're facing, that match the scale, scope, and urgency of them. And I think that we can see, we acknowledge that the same leadership that has sort of gotten us into this mess aren't going to be the ones to get us out of it. And so we're trying to merge, I think, electoral organizing with social movement building. And you can see the sort of case study of that work with candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being able to, once elected, team up with organizations like us in Sunrise to push issues like a Green New Deal into the national conversation.
And in the last election, I think there was 65 candidates that got the...
over 70.
Over 70, who got the endorsement from Justice Democrats. In the end, not a huge number of those won their elections, but obviously some fairly prominent wins. You mentioned AOC, and I think most people accept the premise that to the extent that there's any energy left in the Democratic Party, it's coming out of folks like AOC. All right, so we need to talk about. I want to get into sort of more theory of change questions in a bit, but let's just deal with what's sort of right in the front burner. I think is this. There's a lot of friction right now within the Democratic caucus, and Nancy Pelosi seems to have a strategy. Do you have a sense of what that strategy is?
No, I don't. I think that wielding power for the sake of power and not using it to do the most benefit for the people of the America, and you're putting politics before it, doesn't make sense to have it in the first place. And so I think that, for us, the strategy that we feel is the one that is exciting to voters is by going straight to them, carrying our message straight to them, and that's presenting solutions that are actually matching the problems that are facing them every day. And so I hope Nancy Pelosi chooses to do that and focus on defeating Donald Trump and not singling out 4 members of Congress versus the Problem Solvers Caucus, which I think is causing her more trouble.
I mean, but do you even from even from her perspective, do you see what I think they should start with impeachment hearings, but I can understand the sort of theory behind why you wouldn't. But I honestly can't even, based upon what her objectives are, understand what's going on. Do you
I would
guys
agree.
have
No, I don't understand. Like I said, I don't understand it. I think leadership is operating from a place of courage and from strength, and not just being afraid of what the Republicans are going to say or how politically it's going to do. I think at the end of the day, we have to do what's right for the American people and uphold, at least for members of Congress, have to uphold their constitutional responsibility to hold the president accountable.
Okay, so give me a sense of what, Justice Democrats, presumably the strategy is going to be an extension of what it was last time. You're going to go out and you're going to primary Democrats who are what? When you sit on, presumably in some office with a big board, what are the criteria in which you start to look at what races you're going to look at?
Well, the first thing I will say is that we're not in this to be against anybody. We're in this to elect champions of the issues that we care about. So first off, I think, what we're trying to do is something positive, which is transform, I think, the direction of this country to speed up the timescale that we need to tackle issues like climate change. But I think the way that we look at districts is part art, part science. That art part is what I just spoke to, which is that we're electing champions. And we believe that the foundation of our process that rests on a nomination form is because we need a Congress that's not majority white, that's not majority wealthy, and that reflects the diversity, not just of ethnicity, but of background of the American people, right? We have 330 million bright and amazing people that make up the most advanced society, economy, all of that stuff, right? That means that we can diversify Congress beyond just attorneys and wealthy people. The science part, to get to your point, is where we look at, I think, positions within the Democratic Party. How long have they gone unchallenged? What are the demographic makeups of the district, both in terms of, the makeup of the community there, but also, is it urban, is it rural? Is that going to inform our field program? What is the ideological record of the incumbent? Someone like Henry Cuellar is going to go to the top of the list, right? But if we had done that for just Joe Crowley, he wouldn't have, right? But he has the fourth most powerful Democrat in the House, someone that when you talk to the people there has been absent, hadn't been challenged in a long time, and took a ton of corporate and Wall Street money. And so I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is bring out the best in Democrats. We personally believe that no incumbent is beholden to their seat. We only have so many resources, so this cycle we're going to focus on 20 to 25, with the majority being against incumbent Democrats that we feel deserve to be challenged.
So, okay, so when you're making those calculations, the primary factor is going to be the behavior of those incumbents, and then if there's a couple of stars in a marginal seat, then you go with the marginal. Then those are the ones.
No, I would flip it. I would say the number one thing is that we want to elect champions. So even if it's a district that seems really difficult, like AOC's, we're going to do it anyway because we need to support progressive, grassroots, insurgent challengers if we want to transform the party, not just from a win-lose perspective, but also to advance the issues that we care about. And we can see that just over the past 2 to 3 years, right? Single payer is now asked at the presidential debate to be asked. So I think either way, that's important. That's number one. I think number two is making sure that we have that we replace incumbents that are deeply out of touch with democratic values, like Dan Lipinski, Henry Cuellar, or those that aren't that are accepting corporate money and ruled by special interests.
So I asked Sean McElwee this question. I know the Data for Progress, you guys do a lot of work together. What is the number, do you think, that progressives need to get to in the caucus to where they have the ability to sort of to basically take the problem solvers and sideline them? What's the critical mass? Do you have a sense of that, or is it we'll know it when we get there?
So I'm also a co-founder of Brand New Congress. So I literally used to think we're going to repeal and replace and run 400 candidates. So I definitely used to think that we needed hundreds of Justice Democrats in there. But I think the reality is that we can see that it doesn't take that many to really expand not just the national conversation, but I think momentum for our movement, right, to continue to power it. Because at the end of the day, these issues are really urgent, but we're going to have to build over time, to your point, right? So I think that where I used to think it was, hundreds of Justice Democrats, I think if we build a caucus of 20 to 30 and we wield, and they are putting their political ambitions to the side and they are focusing on what's right for the American people, even when it's uncomfortable, I think that we can see that the rest of the caucus will sign on. And you can see that with, Green New Deal on day one had over 80 co-sponsors. And when you look at the co-sponsorships, a lot of them are afraid of getting primary challenged. So I think that it's a number of strategies that we have to use to really pressure incumbents, but one of the best ways that we've seen to be able to do that and already have an impact is by just challenging them.
Yeah, McElwee also added, and I have to say, it stuck with me because in all my time discussing the value of challenging incumbents, I hadn't really quite contemplated the idea of even challenging those who may not be in that column of a Cuellar, but to empower them to go to Nancy Pelosi and say, look, I'm going to get challenged here, so I need to do X, Y, and Z. Nadler, for instance, I need to subpoena, or I need to issue, to get more information or something like that. I mean, when you guys are looking at this stuff, to what extent do you look at maybe looking at different districts around, putting aside for the moment as to what Democrats are not necessarily on board programmatically, but is there a second sort of look at things where you look at if we had this type of geographic distribution of Justice Democrats, or if we had this type of demographic representation of certain demographic, Waukesha County, let's say. Do you contemplate that notion of there is a potential strategy that involves very specific districts around the country that would leverage a speaker or a majority leader more so than others? Or is that just overthinking things?
No, that's not overthinking it. I think that's exactly what we're doing. I think that we have to apply pressure, and build power. And I think, in absent of being able to win hundreds of congressional seats, I think one of the only ways is by being able to choose races at this time, right? I think last time we had a little bit of a shotgun method where we endorsed over 70. And we did that because we wanted to back progressive challengers and show that it doesn't matter if you're running in Texas, the Democratic Party shouldn't be forgetting about you. And if we want to, actually build power long term, it can't just be a transactional relationship with the community and thinking about, win and lose. You have to make multi-cycle investments to see change, right? But I think this time where we have, a $16.17 average contribution, I want to make sure that we're using our resources as strategically for the movement, but obviously to build power as possible. And I think one of the best ways to do that is by that part art, part science method, where we're building a narrative in a race, we're finding and recruiting candidates that are reflective of the communities that they're serving, and we're making sure that they are going to run unapologetically because they champion these issues. There's an intuitive, their life experience is why they support these policies. And I think the people that we're going to be challenging, like Henry Cuellar, like Dan Lipinski, and the ones to come, are going to be that mix of champion, and also because those particular incumbents are halting progressive priorities, and if we want to pass legislation at the end of the day, they need to go.
What have there been instances where you have over the past year and a half, I guess, maybe since following the 2018 election, where you thought to yourself, wow, they're afraid of us, and who would that be? To the extent, have there been moments where you sort of became conscious of okay, now we're not necessarily that you need outside validation to say that you're legit, but that you got a sense of this is how we're being perceived in the context of the establishment, let's say?
Well, I will say, and I'm really proud that we do not have an inside game beyond getting the champions that we have in there and making sure that they are, have the support and doing the good work that they do. Our power does not come from DC insiders and the establishment. So that's first off. But I will say that, I don't think anyone was expecting Jessica Cisneros to raise $150,000 in 48 hours.
Right.
And I think that people are taking this race seriously, establishment and not establishment. And I think even people within the sort of party establishment is exactly what's happening right now on the national stage with Pelosi attacking these 4 women of color who are championing what their constituents want, are really disappointed in that. They're not just sort of Bernie bros like myself. They are people that have been in the party for a long time that are disappointed with the leadership and the direction that this country is going. Because we got Donald Trump, right? For whatever reason, we couldn't stop him as a Democratic Party. 2016 was when I got politically activated, and I feel like it's my responsibility to try and do something about it and really believe that the same leadership that got us here isn't going to be the ones that get us out.
You weren't involved in politics at all before 2016?
I was a full-time student and full-time in the workforce. And that's why I think primary challenges are so important, because my entryway into politics was during a presidential primary. Bernie Sanders, I couldn't afford to go to college like I had planned to when I moved out to California. I'm originally from Connecticut. But I, heard this crazy old white guy from Vermont talking about these big solutions and that, we needed millions of people to step up and demand change if we're going to do something. And I think that's powerful. And there were tons of other young women of color like myself that stepped up. And we're not going away, even as much as Pelosi wants to push us out.
Why do you think that, maybe this is outside your portfolio, but why do you think...
and just a heads up, I gotta go soon.
Sure. Well, why do you think your generation has been able to be more effective, let's say, than my generation in churning things a little bit in the Democratic Party?
I don't know if it's a question of effectiveness, because when we look back at some of the biggest social movements of our past, which is our North Star, right? We look at, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? That it's always been young people. The founding of this country, as much as, they probably wouldn't have liked people like me, we're young people.
Right.
And so, if we're gonna sort of continue to pass the baton, I think that, my generation is going to be the first that's worse off than their parents. I'm questioning whether or not I can have kids, because in 10 years, are we going to have a planet to live on? I grew up during the 2008 financial crisis and watching my parents struggle. I couldn't afford to go to college, and that's why I'm sitting here and had to create a full-time job for myself. So I think when you hear people like Joe Biden, for example, say, "Oh, millennials, they're so privileged. He said that before. It's really hurtful. And when you see, the leadership of the Democratic Party, like Nancy Pelosi, slighting the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, some of the first 2 Muslim women ever elected to Congress. When millions of young people really feel a sense of urgency, not from a privileged place, but because we can't afford to do the things that we want to do, it's a privileged position for the Democratic Party to face. So I don't know if that means that we've got a big fight ahead of us, but I think for me it's hard to see beyond the next 2 years of what's going to happen if we don't do something in 2020 to defeat Donald Trump and actually elect a Democrat that's going to go big and going to do what's scientifically mandated that needs to be done, to deal with climate change and implement something like a Green New Deal. Because we've done it before. That's the crazy part, right?
Right.
We've done this before, and we got to go back to our roots.
If someone wants to give $16 or $17,
JusticeDemocrats.com.
JusticeDemocrats.com. Alexandra Rojas, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
It. Okay, folks, we're having a little bit of a problem with our video feed. We're going to stop our video feed and try and relaunch, and we will do so in just about 3 minutes. We'll be back. We've got a lot more guests for you, and we will continue with our coverage at Netroots Nation. All right, we're going to sign off, and we'll sign right back on.